But welcome everyone to the third webinar to our ongoing series. The series is focused at looking at the future in business, the steps that business owners and leaders can take to help their organizations recover from the devastation of the pandemic. And today we're looking at urban planning, the future of living and working in Ottawa. And COVID has transformed everyone's daily lives over the past 15 months. It's impossible to imagine in how many ways, but it's so much so that when we, return to our old, ways of living and working, it just won't be the same. And the pandemic has, at least afforded us the opportunity to be really thoughtful and examine these things and think about how we are going to make some of these changes. And all of this is all going on at the same time that the City of Ottawa is updating its official plan, or OP as we may shorten it, for the first time in 20 years. And the OP describes itself as being a vision for the future growth of the city and a policy framework to guide the city's physical development. Pandemic has no doubt been incredibly hard. And how should businesses plan for the future? And that'll bring its own challenges. So here today to give us a glimpse at the future of living and working in Ottawa is Jacob Bolduc. He's Senior Planner with Fotenn Planning and Design. So welcome, Jacob.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Nice to be here.
Thanks, Jacob. We're going to dive in pretty quickly. And Jacob, maybe I thought we could start by just sharing a little bit about the work that Fotenn does and your role as Senior Planner.
Yeah, absolutely. So Fotenn started right here in Ottawa in the early 1990s as a planning firm, just a small, 2-3 person shop, but eventually expanded to include urban design services and landscape architecture services most recently. Main office is still here in Ottawa, but we also have offices in Kingston and Toronto. Fotenn kind of works in two main types of work, development work and policy work. About 75% of our work is probably development based, meaning we work on applications for developers and other clients on a variety of development approvals. So official plan amendments, zoning bylaw amendments, site plan control, minor variance, consents, plans of subdivision, the whole list. The rest of our work is sort of policy work, either for the public sector or sometimes private clients, but it depends. And those can often involve development as well, such as drafting feasibility studies for new provincial projects. If they have a facility they want to expand, well, they have to look at if that's possible, right? Or sometimes we'll be assisting municipalities with development approvals if their planning department is temporarily overwhelmed, or maybe their planner left for another job and they need somebody to step in because somebody has to review those applications. We also review plans and OPs and zoning bylaws for municipalities across Canada, including a lot of northern communities. As a senior planner at Fotenn, I lead and manage files with the help of our other planners, development files, public sector files, development option and massing studies. Basically, if you have a piece of land and you want to know what to do with it, we can help. Or if you have an idea and you want to know where it should go, we can help you do that as well. So everything from big developers to small clients, we handle it all.
In short, it's quite a mixed bag and complicated. And so the experts in untangling what that complicated matter certainly is. So we're going to dive right into today's topic. And everyone, we do invite you to submit questions as we go along. We're going to get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation, but we're going to get started. So Jacob, first question: what are the major components of the city's new official plan?
Yeah, before I jump into discussions about the new OP, I did want to start off by saying how big of a job this is, and I hope that everybody realizes how much work is involved and how difficult this work is, and what's at stake. So a big kudos to the city, Elaine and his team. They're doing a really great job, and that plan is still being reworked, and there are still some changes coming. We only have a draft version right now. So things that I talk about today are still subject to change. There's still a lot that we haven't had a chance to review and dissect, but I'll try to give you guys the broad strokes and at least the overall direction moving forward under the new OP. So the new OP takes a bit of a different approach to the current version. One of the most challenging parts of any OP structure is, I guess to simplify it, finding a way to break your city down into categories. And those could apply to different ways. It could be based on geography, it could be based on land use. You have to find a way to categorize everything so that the particular policies will apply to those and not apply to other areas. So it's about finding ways to provide policy direction that applies to lands on a general basis, but also you can funnel down and make it more specific as required through other tools like secondary plans or area specific policies, or even in the new OP, which I'm going to get into once we talk about all these different components, the use of overlays and other tools. So I'm happy to start right away and just go right down into each of those things.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind just giving us some of the details and breaking it down for us a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say the big major change right off the bat is the introduction of transects. So if you were to look at a breakdown of the city under the current OP, you would notice that you have mixed use centers and town centers, which are basically clusters of mixed use and high density and building heights, generally centered around transit, but they're meant to be sort of I can't call them hubs because that's what we're going to call some of them now, but they were basically focuses of development, right? You're going to have all your services, the 15-minute community, all these kinds of ideas. And then you would have other areas, employment areas, the green belt and everything else. But a big chunk of the city was something called the general urban area, and still is today, I guess. And that's just basically everything in between. You have identified all these hotspots, all these important locations, and everything in between is general urban area. What that does is it kind of certain neighborhoods all fall under one category, even though those neighborhoods are vastly different to one another. I mean, Centertown, Alta Vista, Carlington, Barhaven, parts of Barhaven and Canada, they're all kind of fall under the same grouping. Now, there is obviously other specific rules that would apply to help break down that difference, but transects, and this is where I'm going with it, break up the city into basically 6 groups based on their proximity to the downtown core. And that's sort of this ring effect that goes out and radiates out from the core, gives us a different context that we can then go through hubs, corridors, and everything I'll get into in a minute, based on that proximity. And of course, that means proximity to services, proximity to employment, proximity to transit, all the big things that people are looking for. So of the 6 transects, we've got the downtown core, which is pretty easy. It's the Trillium line to the Rideau River, Ottawa River to the 417 roughly. So think of that Centertown, Byward Market, U of O kind of area. Then you've got the inner urban, which would include areas like Westboro, Little Italy, Carlington, Alta Vista, Manor Park. It's kind of the next bowl. Then you would have your outer urban area, which is think of like south of Meadowlands, Walkley, South Keys, Blossom Park, kind of the next bowl before you hit the green belt, which is number 4. And then outside of the green belt, you've got your suburban transect. And finally, you've got your rural area just outside of that. So it's kind of breaking the city down, like I said, a set of bowls that move out from the downtown core, and each one has a different character, a different feel, a different need that you can then zone in and actually provide those communities with what they're looking for. So from a policy direction perspective. So after the transects, going back to how we had said, kind of those mixed use centers, and I don't want to compare them to hubs because they are different and the city's doing a lot of work to change these things, but hubs are also, I would say, a center of activity focused on rapid transit stations, either LRT or BRT, whether they're planned or they already exist. The plan would be to concentrate a diversity of functions, higher density development, more mixed land use, more transit connectivity. And typically that radius that you would have is about 800 meters of comfortable walking distance to that center. So if you live in that catchment area, then you might be seeing some more development or some more diversified land uses. Hubs are also meant to be, because they're connected so strongly to the rapid transit system, they're meant to be seen as major employment centers, right? You could think of office buildings popping up next to transit, or mixed use buildings that have retail on the ground floor, office on a few floors, and then residential above. The idea would be that people can live near transit, but they also want to work near transit so that they can get to there easily. That's sort of the idea of hubs. It's exactly what it sounds like. Going out from the hubs, I guess you would call them the spokes, but they're called corridors and main streets. These are bands of land that are specified streets on a schedule in the official plan, whose planned function looks for higher density development, more mixed use, more transit service than what would be abutting those in the neighborhoods. So you would basically, if you're living in the neighborhood next to it, typically you're going to be walking there or biking there or taking transit there for a lot of your services. So Those are further broken down into main street corridors. We have a concept right now of main streets in the OP for traditional and arterial main streets. Traditional main streets being anything that has a character pre-1945, so kind of that older walkable, lower building height type thing, whereas arterial main streets are more typical of the post-war era, more suburban, more auto-centric, big surface parking lots, think of Maryvale, that kind of thing. So in the new OP, they break them down into main street corridors, just main streets. We've kind of removed that term. And then we have minor corridors, which kind of function the same way, that there are increased building heights, but they're not looking for the same mix of land uses, maybe not the same building heights within that transect. So, and I think you can also permit all residential buildings. So you don't have the same mixed use within building policies that we would be looking for on the main streets or in hubs. And then outside of that, kind of replacing the concept of the general urban area that we had before is neighborhoods. It's everything else. It's everything in between. And that's typically where people are going to live. You're going to have some commercial components within there, convenience stores, dry cleaners, other local convenience things that people can still walk to. Typically low rise, 4-story building height, very similar to the current general urban area. But of course, now that we have the transects, all of those areas are a little bit different. So different neighborhoods based on proximity to services in the core. The last two things really quick, overlays. Overlays are really interesting. So certain neighborhoods will have an overlay applied to them. It could be evolving, transforming. I believe there's another one I'm not remembering. But the idea would be that these are neighborhoods the city has determined to be changing in some way. Maybe some are just gearing up for changes because there's a new transit station coming and they're going to want to intensify around that transit station. Or it's a neighborhood that's already changing really quickly or has been for the last 10 years. And so the city is seeing a different direction for it moving forward. Maybe it's all single detached homes, and now we want to see the introduction of more townhouses or more low-rise apartment buildings because it could be close to transit and they want to, again, increase that catchment area. Or for any other number of services and amenities. Finally, you have your employment lands, non-traditional industrial mixed and traditional industrial freight and storage. Exactly what it sounds like: business parks, offices, light industrial versus manufacturing, distribution, storage. We used to have heavy and light industrial. These are kind of changing as well. And then you've got your greenbelt and your greenbelt facilities as well. So that's kind of a loose overview of all the designations really quickly. I hope everybody caught that.
It's definitely a bit of a puzzle, but I appreciate that you've tried to sort of fit the pieces together for us in terms of when you put it all together, what the map of the city looks like, and then perhaps even layering on top of that with the overlays and so on and so forth. So that's a helpful visual.
For sure. And it works like a funnel, right? You identify, okay, what transect am I in? Am I in a hub? Okay, no. Am I on a corridor? Yeah, I am. Okay. And then, how the policies apply. So there's a bit of a hierarchy there that enables you to work through it and determine what policy framework would apply to you. And I do see a quick question in chat. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be going there right away, but there's also rural areas. The PPS provides a direction for intensification within the urban boundary and within settlement areas. Rural areas are still, it's my understanding, generally how we're treating them today. Existing uses can remain. We're not looking for large scale intensification in these areas. Still not trying to allow for country lot subdivisions or any other new, more intense rural uses. We're kind of just trying to keep it the way it is and preserve our agricultural and rural lands.
It's a good question and well timed in terms of answering it. So no penalties. Thank you. So here's a bit of a deep question. I mean, the consultations for the new plan have been going on for years. As we mentioned, the last time this was done was 20 years ago. And I want to get your opinion if you think whether the outcomes would have been different if the process would have been started and sort of given our new reality. I talked about the pandemic at the beginning, and what do you think about that?
It's a bit of a cop-out answer on my part. It's a yes and no. And the reason for that is that there's no doubt COVID has had an impact on planners and the way we look at development files or policy making. I know I've been working from home for the last 15 months and realized that I can do that. It's not that bad, and meetings can be held online. And I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of policy direction that the new OP is building on that has already been established in Ottawa. And then there's probably some new directions that we're going to be seeing on a more specific level. But I think overall, the theme remains the same. And that would be transit-oriented development and making sure that we can move people efficiently, not relying on automobiles or having an auto-centric city. Because the old adage goes, you can make roads wider, but that's just like buying bigger pants if you're gaining weight. At some point, you can't keep doing that. At some point, it's not going to work. And at some point, you have to think about your choices and think about how you want to live. And that is the direction that a lot of the province is moving in, or is mandated to move in, essentially, is transit-oriented development. So leading into that, you have a document called the Provincial Policy Statement, which is the province's direction towards municipalities for how they develop their official plan and other policies. And that was updated right at the start of COVID in May 2020. So this policy direction that the province had been working on for several years came out right at the beginning of COVID. And I think this gets to the crux of the question is, if that had come out after COVID, how would the city's process change? How would the dominoes fall? I think generally we'd still be staying the course, especially in a city like Ottawa, because our priorities are the same. We still want to develop around our brand new transit system that cost a lot of money and is expected to fuel us for the future. And we're already on stage 2. We're looking to extend that network to take everything. The city has a infrastructure and a transportation master plans that help provide that direction for what's affordable and what's doable and where should these go. And you've got, roads that are being made wider to accommodate transit. There's a whole process that's already underway, and the new OP is building on that based on provincial direction for transit-oriented development. So the list of priorities remains the same. But I think people's choices that they've made, and I know we'll get to a few questions about that later. I think at that level, there will be some differences. For example, people wanting to live in the city versus knowing they can work from home, so they might move out to a bedroom community.
That's really, you're leading right into the next question. You're right, and I don't think that answer was at all a bit of a cop out. I find it a bit comforting to know that the priorities remain the same, and we can certainly think of the pandemic as a bit of a bubble. It's a big blip, but a bit of a bubble, and things may look different on the other side. But the fact that the priorities will remain largely consistent is comforting. So you mentioned that the way we work, the way we live, shop, exercise, get about and have fun. Given the pandemic and everything that we've had to deal with, it's pervasive in how it touches all of those things. And each of these things, how we do these things, work, live, have fun, exercise, shop, it has an impact on the economic activity of the city. And I just wanted to break that down a bit more. And I thought I would start with the work piece, which is office space. So, if you get out your crystal ball, what do you think is anticipated in sort of our post-pandemic world on how office space will be used? Thinking about, people returning to the office, personal space, location, those kinds of things.
Yeah, office space is a weird one because we've all, I think, those of us lucky enough to have a dedicated space at home. We should start with that. A lot of people can't work from home or can't do their jobs from home, but for someone like me, I'm able to have a setup, my desk, I have a webcam, I have my monitor, I have all the tools that I need to do my job efficiently. So I will be returning to the office when, it's safe and able to do so. But I would hope that there's a little bit more flexibility, and I'm not just speaking to my employer, I'm speaking in general, that especially in the summer or everything, people are responsible and people are able to get their jobs done from home, and there's a little bit more flexibility there. It would reduce commuting traffic if we had some sort of staggered schedule. There's a lot of benefits to having a more flexible work environment. One way that the government and other industries have been doing this for a while is a flexible work environment with flex spaces. So you show up to work, Office 2.0, I believe they call it. You show up, you don't have a dedicated desk with your phone and your things. You show up to a blank desk with the tools. You plug in your system, your laptop, or you punch in your phone code, whatever it is, and you can set up for the afternoon, the morning, the day, whatever you need. And then you unplug everything at night, take it home. Maybe the next day you don't go in. I'm sure a lot of people in chat have some experience with this type of setup. So there's that. There's the shift to Office 2.0, and now I guess the question is Office 3.0 people working at home, and is there an excess of these spaces? Some of these spaces will be converted. It's still a building; it can still be used. I know I've worked on a few office conversions in Ottawa, where people are looking to convert it to residential. Very expensive, very difficult to do. Even just think about how, an office buildings, the windows don't open, but if you live there, you probably want your windows to open. Little things like that. You don't necessarily want these big glass buildings. So there is a lot of retrofitting and a lot of expense that comes with that. So if it's not an office and if residential is very expensive, then where does it go? Well, the land is always going to be valuable. So there's always something that these office areas or buildings can turn into. What I would say is that we don't really know yet what the post-pandemic world is going to look like, but I think all these options are on the table, and I would hope that everybody can find a solution that works best for them.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair. Nobody knows. So crystal ball is a little bit cloudy, and it's not the first time I've said that. So I want to get at just continuing with office space for a second, because we do have a major tenant in Ottawa, being that of the federal government, and they take up a lot of square footage in terms of our office space around the city and in the downtown core as well. So do you have any, specific thoughts on what's expected for that workforce?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of redevelopment of existing. We're seeing it right now, right? These big government employment complexes like Tunney's or down on Booth Street complex, they're changing. They're going to be changing. They're changing because it's just not a viable approach anymore to have these large office complexes if not everybody's going into the office, right? You might need half the capacity, and that frees up, say half your site for something else. And that means you're lowering, the federal government is just as interested in everybody else about lowering their overhead, right? If you have a large amount of land and a large amount of office and you have to run it and you have to generate energy and all the things that go into running an office, like anybody else, they're going to want to try to reduce those costs and find efficiencies. And so the federal government has been, doing very well on that. And for years now, trying to find a new way, again, Office 2.0. I know CMHC has this productivity based approach that they've introduced where you can go into the office, you can work from home, you can start at 7 a.m., you can start at 5 a.m. Nobody, as long as the work gets done, it doesn't really matter. So I think when it comes to the feds, a few organizations or agencies have already kind of been making that change, and the rest are just going to have to find a way to either make similar changes or the same changes, because I don't imagine that for most positions I shouldn't say most, for a large number of positions in the federal government, that over the next 10 years, it's going to be the same as it is today, where people commute over to Portage and sit in a cubicle. I think these things are really going to change, and it's going to change our cities, right? Tunney's Pasture or the Booth Street complex or any number of federal lands are highly well located. They were built at a time maybe where it was a little bit out there, but as the city grew, a lot of these places have kind of been brought into the fold. So I think overall you're going to see a lot of changes because the land is still the land and the location is still important. But if you don't need it for an office cabinet of workers, if we call these buildings what it is, then we could see some changes and some better, more efficient land use there as well, right? If somebody could live at Tunney's and shop at Tunney's and work at Tunney's, that's great. That's exactly the direction we're moving in.
Yeah, and it's you mentioned the fact that these were built, it might have been a little bit out there, but now it's the center, right? So it's the center, and as you mentioned, I mean, everyone was drawn to the center. So being a center in the downtown core, for example, like businesses, shops, restaurants, other consumer services like dry cleaners, I mean, dental clinics, like you spent a lot of your time at work. So you surrounded yourself with other pieces of your life around that location. And if people aren't flocking as much to something like the downtown core where all of those other services are, what do you think is going to happen with that? What's the future hold for those things?
It's they're going to have to adapt. I think short answer, it's going to be really tough. There are a lot of businesses. I mean, I live in Centertown, so I still go to a lot of these businesses, but even a lot of them close at 5, right? Because they are centered around office culture. I could think of a few sandwich shops that I like that if I don't get out there on my lunch break, I'm not getting it for dinner. So it's it's definitely a lot of business. There are definitely a lot of businesses that have centered themselves around that 9 to 5 office culture, and they are going, in my opinion, they are probably going to struggle and need to adapt. A lot of these, I mean, a lot of these places, again, going back to the idea of sandwich shops, they rely on catering for, we have a lunch
Mhm.
meeting and we do 60 sandwiches. That's a big order. That's great, and they can deliver that all within the same building. But if people are having Zoom meetings and they're not going to these big 60-person meetings in the office, then that's a lot of business lost. So I don't know what that transition is going to look like, but I think as we're seeing with a lot of other businesses, not just these office culture businesses, commercial spaces are becoming available as businesses struggle in COVID, and my heart goes out to all the small business owners. But a lot of those spaces are going to come available for new entrepreneurs or new businesses to start up and try again, right? They're going to be able to fill some void. Maybe they're not offering, again, going back to the whole idea of sandwiches, and I know I'm talking a lot of sandwiches, but maybe a different restaurant moves in that is able to offer something different that would serve the residents of the community, versus something that closes at 5 o'clock and meets that kind of ghost town post 5 p.m. downtown financial district core. So I think that's going to be a big struggle. But I think there's also an appetite for people to always want to live downtown. I know I'm kind of in that camp. I've lived 5 different addresses in Centertown now. It feels like home, and there's a lot of services and amenities that I like, and they're changing and evolving. But you always find some new ones, you lose some old ones. There's a cycle. So I guess what I'm saying is that for a lot of these businesses that rely on office culture, it's going to be very challenging moving forward. But it's happened before. Businesses adapt, and I really am cheering for them. So.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see, as you mentioned, if some of those office spaces turn into residential spaces, and people do like to. I mean, it's a way of life, right? Depending on where you choose to live, and that may have an impact as well. Hopefully, a positive one. But I feel like I need a snack. Stop talking about sandwiches.
Yeah, but you made a good point there, Natalie. It's the more
Yeah.
people who live in proximity to services, the more people are going to use those services. Typically, right? Obviously, if I need a big box item, I'm probably going to go out to the big box stores. I'm going to try to shop
Mhm.
right in my neighborhood, but if I need a couch, it might be a little more difficult to walk up Bank Street and find something. So um, there is there is a large amount of people who still live here and who are able to support those businesses, but they might have to pivot to something that supports residents versus commuters.
Yeah, makes sense. So I'm gonna turn the corner a little bit, but still just sort of leading off of what we've been talking about, because offices certainly have a big impact on traffic. You've talked about traffic a little bit. You've touched on it in other areas, but commuting and public transport uh, is a big topic and has been for the last number of years. So how will that change in the years ahead compared to our, I keep calling it the pre-pandemic world?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think that that impact is going to have with the change in
Uh,
the use of office space?
the goal is always less rush hour traffic and less traffic volumes overall. Um, there's been different techniques that have been introduced over the years. Some businesses have staggered their work hours, or maybe a business park will talk, all the different businesses about staggering, so that some people work 7 to 3 or 7 to 4, and other people come in at 10, so that you don't have everybody going through the same intersection to turn left to get it. You don't have these bottlenecks that get created when everybody's trying to get to the same place at the same time, because that's just planning for major capacity events, right? And I'm not a transportation engineer, and I won't get into that. But the idea being that if twice a day this intersection is really heavily loaded, but the other 23 hours a day it's fine, um, is there a better way to balance and spread that out so that we don't have these bottlenecks? Because otherwise we're planning for worst case scenario all the time. And I know that's sort of engineering. That sort of describes what engineering is, planning for the worst case scenario. But I guess the idea would be to have less rush hour traffic and traffic volumes overall. So um, that would mean people shifting to transit, which is kind of a touchy topic right now, given that you don't want to be in a car with 40 other people in the middle of a global pandemic. But hopefully we get to a point where people are more comfortable doing that, because I can speak to some of my colleagues who were coming into work. We moved offices closer to the transit station, and as soon as the LRT opened, I think a good 5 to 6 of 5, 7, I don't know, under 10, but closer to that 10 number. We're taking transit every day, and they are loving it. So hopefully we can get back to that. but yeah, we can't keep going. I'm not trying to toot the planner, active transportation, no cars horn here, but it's true. Everybody
It
loves their
helps.
cars. I have a car, I drive, it's great, but I try to find any other option possible before I hop in my car. And I think that's it. It's not about not having a car. You can have a car. That's fine. You're going to need it if you want to drive out of town on weekends. But for commuting, for those regular trips, if you can have a good transit schedule, which means having good transit infrastructure,
Mhm.
then I think that's where we're going.
So let's talk about housing again. We've talked about traffic and offices, but I want to get to housing.
Mhm.
And so home, whether you're a buyer or a renter, I think some people may be looking for a change, right? Because the way we used to live in our houses, as you mentioned, sometimes now we are also working at our houses and may not have been set up appropriately. Like not everyone has a home office, and people are working at their dining room tables or their breakfast bars, over the last 15 months. So how do you think that's going to change in terms of what people are looking for in terms of housing?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the talk about the bachelors in one bedrooms downtown, right? The sort of yuppie apartments. For somebody like myself, I moved to Ottawa. My partner wasn't here yet. I set myself up in a one bedroom apartment that wasn't very big, just enough to have a place to live, and I would go to work every day, and that's all I needed. Really, you're just an apartment is kind of just a bedroom and a place to keep your stuff. If you live in a downtown core, that's what it is. I'm always out at the parks or the bars or hanging out with friends or traveling on weekends. So it's a place to sleep, cook, and park my stuff. That's changing now that people are working from home. I think about my situation with my partner. She's always been working from home. She's self-employed. I started working from home. All of a sudden, we realized that if the bedroom is her office because that's where she works, and I'm in the living room, I'm moving 3 feet to my couch at the end of the day, and that's not a way to live. So we started looking for a larger apartment, and we ended up finding a different, living arrangement. We're very happy, and now I have an office in the hallway. And again, I'm not trying to keep this too personal, but this is very personal to me because I was in a one bedroom and went, if I'm going to be working from home for the foreseeable future, this kitchen table setup is not going to work for me. So I think there's a lot of people who are going to be moving away from that one bedroom model towards 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, right? Maybe you're financially comfortable enough that a couple can have a 3 bedroom apartment because they each need a dedicated office and then the bedroom, or maybe they share an office and there's the spare room. However, people want to do this, but apartments are going to get bigger, and they're going to have more bedrooms, I think, in some ways. I know I have clients that are looking at that and are looking to provide that, because the other part of this is that families are going to be moving into apartments, which is, common in many parts of the world, but in North America, we still have this single detached white picket fence mentality, whereas a lot of younger families don't want that. They're happy with the duplex and living on the ground floor, or they're happy with living in a condo building, but you need the room. You can't do that in a 700 square foot one bedroom apartment, or smaller as they're getting smaller. So I think the idea is that housing typologies need to change. We need to have a greater mix of housing typologies. We need to have a greater mix of unit types within those typologies. So we're moving away from building singles. We're always going to have singles. There's still an appetite for singles. That'll be fine. But townhouses or stacked townhouses or low-rise apartment buildings or mid-rise apartment buildings, and not only having those greater densities and building heights, but ensuring that the units within them are capable of supporting the market demand. And the market demand right now, at least in my understanding, is towards not necessarily, there is a market for small micro units for those young professionals, and that's great. That's really compact, well use of space, but larger 2-3 bedroom units capable of accommodating more of a family unit, or couples or young couples with a baby who can't afford a single detached house in the burbs. Those types of things are changing. So
And that is another trend that we're seeing, right? Is that you talked about the ideology of having the white picket fence in a single family home, and that does still exist. And we're not going to talk about housing prices at all. But in terms of people maybe moving out of, like, away from the city into some more rural areas, do you think that trend is something that's going to continue? Or is it something that developers are thinking about? What are your thoughts in terms of planning around that?
yeah, I think there's yes to both. What I would say is that some people have gotten the go ahead from their employer that they're going to be downscaling. I think of one of the big players in Ottawa is Shopify. And a lot of their employees have been told that basically moving forward, and maybe I'm getting this wrong, I'm sorry if there's any Shopify people in chat, that they had 2 office buildings downtown, and they're going to be consolidating and moving away from that office-centered growth to a work-at-home growth. And that's sort of a direction that they moved in. So for any of those people who were told, you're working from home, all you need is good internet connection, you can live wherever, we don't care, and you'll come into the office once a month, great. Now all of a sudden your livability options are through the roof. You could live in Montreal if you wanted to, right? There's 100 different ways you could do it. I think part 2, when it comes to the appetite for developers to develop that type of housing in quote unquote bedroom communities, is definitely going to be part of it. It won't happen in the rural area because the province is very focused on directing growth to settlement areas, is the correct term. And that basically means places where people already are. We can't keep swallowing up green spaces and farmland and other important agricultural and ecologically significant lands to build single detached homes. We can't keep doing that. That needs to stop. And we're putting the brakes on that. But, Carleton Place, Clarence Rockland, Russell, these communities that are still within commuting distance, but maybe you don't need to go in 5 days a week, just once a week. I think you will see an appetite for growth in those communities. And I know, speaking to some of my municipal colleagues there, it's happening. It's definitely a lot of people moving out in that direction.
And I just, I have one more question before we just move into, I'm hoping we have a few minutes to take a couple of questions from people. But my one question is around developments, the redevelopments that are ongoing in Ottawa right now, for example, LeBreton Flats as I think is a good example. So, what will the impact be on the ongoing developments on the city once all of this is complete?
Yeah, there's a lot of those big redevelopment projects that are going on right now. LeBreton is definitely one of them, and that's got a very contentious history. But it is very strategically located at the intersection of our 2 rail lines, and other development is going up around there too. So these larger development parcels or these larger redevelopment parcels are strategically located generally. So I think of shopping malls. Some shopping malls will continue. They're a good I suppose, nexus for people to go, and there's offices on top, and they still function as a good compact commercial core. Bayshore and Saint Laurent being 2 of the ones that are probably going to stick around, but I think of places like Lincoln Fields. That's probably going to change. Some shopping malls along Saint Laurent are definitely changing. You're going to see other larger projects evolve towards a mixed use capacity as things go on. LeBreton is still the biggest of these opportunities. Its proximity. There's been a lot of hubbub in the news over the last few years. Everybody knows about the arena going there if it happens at all. New high-rise development hitting those 60-story levels. A lot of focus is shifting to these larger opportunities. And I think the important thing to remember is that those are going to represent a part of our intensification within the urban boundary, but not everything. We can't absorb all growth in areas like LeBreton. It's going to be a lot, and I really hope it's a lot. It's so well located to not be something great that it has to be. A lot of pressure. I'm sorry to put pressure on everybody who's working on this, but then I just saw somebody pop up in chat, Place d'Orleans, right? Like I have a project I'm working on in that community too, and everybody's talking about, well, it's a shopping center, but is a shopping center always going to be a shopping center, or what else is going to be here? Who still goes to a shopping center if you start developing these main streets? And it's an interplay amongst all of these elements. Ensuring we have seniors housing is a big component as part of this, in that people can age in place, and that basically you have housing for everybody. I'm really going off topic when we're talking about LeBreton, trying to avoid that touchy subject, to put it lightly. Yeah. But the impact will be a huge amount of intensification and mixed use in Ottawa through these major redevelopment sites. But I suppose my lesson would be, don't expect that that's where intensification is going to happen only. We do need it to be spread across the city in all of our existing communities to ensure that we are intensifying and using our existing services and infrastructure efficiently. You can have pockets that are higher density than others, but we need to move up as a whole city.
Okay, so we only have about 5 minutes left, and we do have a couple of questions, so we're going to get to them if we can. But before we do, and I just want to take an opportunity to thank everyone for tuning in to our chat today about the future of living and working in Ottawa. A big thank you to you, Jacob, and Foten Planning and Design for lending us your time and your insights. I love your passion about the topic, and I know like I've got 30 other questions that I'm going to hold, and maybe we can chat another time. But before we get into some of the questions, if we can, I just wanted to point out that again, our business recovery series will be returning in the fall. If you missed any of the two presentations that we had earlier, there was a feature with George Hanna of Gabriel Pizza and Gord McMillan of branding agency McMillan, and you can find those recordings on our website or our YouTube channel. And so here I'm just picking up on one of the questions, and we hadn't really touched on this specifically yet. So how is Ottawa's population expected to change over the next decade, and does the official plan account for the growth?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of discussion about this again in the news recently, specifically about the urban boundary. So again, this is kind of the belt that we tie around the city to say, everything's happening in here and everything outside of here, we're going to try to leave as is. There's a lot of discussion about applying ecological features. I mean, the green belt is that idea, right? Is to say, okay, everything inside here smushed together, everything outside of here we'll try to protect, but also in these little communities, we'll all smush together, again, with the intent of preserving ecological features or agricultural lands, or just, making sure that we're not just spreading out completely, which is, of course, the term everybody's familiar with called sprawl. So we do have this urban boundary, and council does set a target for intensification within that. Again, it's been in the news a lot. There was a push for 100% intensification. And I think that was supported by certain councillors. And I think I'll speak on behalf of myself. A chunk of the planning community definitely felt that pushing for that is a more economical and ecological use of resources. You put people where there's already services. You don't build new roads and new pipes to bring to people that you put out in the middle of nowhere. That's not groundbreaking. That's a concept. But the idea was eventually the target was reduced to 60 to account for some new growth in these green space communities or green fields, as we call them. So the OP does definitely, there's a whole team at the city that looks at population projections and what we're going to see. We have an aging population. Boomers continue to get older. They're going to need supportive housing so they can age in place, and policies will reflect that. We're still expecting a large number of immigrants to Ottawa and other urban communities. So that's going to drive a good chunk of our policy direction. The city absolutely takes this into account, and we got the census this year again. So that's going to provide planners with invaluable data about where people live and work and how old they are. This is stuff we use all the time. So between knowing the people that are coming or that exist here, how we can account for it and who they are, it helps us planners do a better job.
This is hopefully everyone has responded to their census. It's my public service announcement. I have one more question, and we've got 2 minutes. So hopefully we can get to it with a quick answer. But during the pandemic, we've seen lots of high traffic roads like the Queen Elizabeth Drive converted to active use only. And that was in the news recently. That's my comment. But more roads are being closed to traffic this summer. Do you think these changes could become permanent?
Yeah, permanent in some way, right? It could be the same way they close the Sir John A, I believe, every Sunday for cyclists. Like, I don't see why we can't do that, right? If it's not a very well-used road outside of commuter traffic, and I don't take Sir John A a lot, so I apologize to anybody in chat who does, close it, open it for cyclists and pedestrians. Why not? It's a space that is allocated for vehicles when it needs to be allocated for vehicles. And I think that's the way we need to start looking at different spaces, whether they are actual lands or parcels or buildings or developments versus roads, right? That's a piece of land, and it could be used in different ways, and it can be flexible. So I would say, yeah, more permanent changes in the sense that there's a schedule and with respect to that flexibility. I don't think they're ever going to close Queen Elizabeth for good and make it a cycle track. Maybe that'd be cool. I know I am a big fan of when they close Bank Street in the summer, and I can go grab a chair and a pizza and a beer and sit out in the street. That's quite nice. And I know Bank Street there's so many other options downtown that why can't we close one? Elgin kind of feel the same way. Maybe there's a schedule that we can get on. Traffic is always an issue when you're closing something, again, that is allocated for vehicles. We can't see roads as for vehicles only. It just has to be that it's for roads, it's for vehicles until they're not. And once we have a better use, move the vehicles aside, you can go find another way.
Yeah, we've got some comments from people supporting things like LRT and decongesting the traffic, so on and so forth. So I just want to thank everyone again for attending. I wish you all a great day. I have no doubt that Jacob does as well. Thank you, Jacob. And
Thanks,
wishing everyone a great day. Thanks for joining. Bye for now.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, everybody. Take care.